The shot is taken from Santa Monica, California, and the time is October 15th, 1975. It is from here that I will leave for my cross-country trip to Boston to attend the 25th reunion of my Harvard Law School class, and then down to Reading, Pennsylvania to see Mother. The sky is clear, and it is my hope that it will remain that way during the entire trip. A long way north of Victorville on the way to Orlando and Las Vegas. Miles and miles of sand and sand dunes and mountains just stretching off into the distance as far as you can see. When you go over one row of hills, you just meet another row of hills for miles and miles. Right now we're about 120 miles on the California side of Las Vegas. That's beautiful. You can just see the hills so far in the distance. And let me zoom in a little bit and you'll be able to see what the texture of the desert is. You see these rocks? Well, when you have millions and millions of them and they're far away, it all looks like this. But it's beautiful. 20 after 5 in the evening, and we're pretty close to Las Vegas, but look at the vast panorama of mountains there. And you hear the car approaching? Catching the very top of those mountains over there. I'll bring it in a little closer and you can see the beautiful peaks. The area just north of Las Vegas, of course, resembles the area on the other side very much, except more so. Look at the distance here. It must be about 80 miles to that mountain. It just goes on and on. We'll bring it in a little closer, but it's really far. Moving along here at a pretty good speed, somewhat above the speed limit. That this road now goes through. This is called the Virgin River Gorge. Here it is looking the other way. Arizona when we went through the gorge, but now we're in Utah. It's just about the size of Gridley, I suspect. But now look how dark and beautiful the sky is. We don't see that in California. I understand a group of people from Los Angeles didn't like the clear sky. So they produced their own little smog manufacturing plant here in the country. You see the snow-capped mountain there in the distance? We're just bringing it in a little closer. And then look at that gorgeous valley. It's a little lake down below. It's miles and miles of the same kind of country with very few cities and almost no people. Beautiful snow-capped mountains just outside of Spanish Fork and Price. But look what starts to appear on the horizon. My gracious, can you see that smog? You'd think you were in LA. Here is the explanation for all that smog. Appears to be Salt Lake City, taken from a shot just south of Salt Lake, where the road turns east to go over to Cheyenne. It's terribly, terribly smoggy there. I wonder if that's still from the Geneva works of the U.S. steel plant we just saw. I think these are. They look like ski trails coming down the hills just east of Salt Lake City on the way to Cheyenne. However, I think we're still in Utah. We haven't entered Colorado yet. That looks like fun. Valley near Colville, Utah. It's said that it's the only valley that is never without water. And I just learned that there was just a great discovery of oil in the mountains nearby. In 2 wells, they have $100 million worth of oil each. And the neighbors are very dissatisfied because it means the ruination of their pretty little area. Evanston, Wyoming, looking towards the south, where we see the high Rockies, which are, I suppose, just west of Denver. There seems to be a fire down there. Do you see the smoke? We'll come in on a little closer. I have no idea what that would be. Wyoming is big country. It just goes on and on and on like that truck. As far as you can see, nothing but rolling hills. Hell is in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming. It is called Little America, and it's a chain that appears to be growing in this area. I've been looking at advertisements for this for the last 150 miles. We now have 4 hitchhikers in there, all with bags, going to Michigan someplace. Hope we make it. On the way here, on the way to Cheyenne in Wyoming, and the 4 of us are having a little snack from the things I brought along from Los Angeles. But take a look. It's these prairies and plains for miles. It really isn't very interesting in Wyoming. We found a real live cowboy. Thank you, mister, for letting us see your pretty hat.
Thank you.
That hat you just saw was in Laramie, Wyoming. Now we're in Nebraska, and I'm showing you a picture of irrigation. It's a long pipe elevated about 10 feet above the ground with water spraying out for, it must cover a quarter of a mile. You hear about, but you don't see very often. Real bona fide cowboys. This is in Nebraska, in the middle of nowhere, on the way to Omaha. We met Ken in Laramie, Wyoming. He's on his way from San Luis Obispo to Des Moines, Iowa, where he's got a job promised. And here's Al. He's a cook, left Michigan to go to where he was going to be a cook. But in the first day he was there, someone stole all his money and all his clothing. Stayed until he ran out of things to eat, and now he's on his way back to Michigan. And here's Jack. He's a painter, ran into hard luck and went into bankruptcy. Going back to Michigan where he's got a job. His wife left him, took the children, and the bankruptcy left him penniless. These 2 I met in Salt Lake City, where they have been hitchhiking for a week, living in barns and fields, and in the gym night and the Salvation Army another night. Guys just down on their luck. Distance, you can see Omaha, Nebraska. We spent the night there. It's an old town. The hotel and the rest of the city seem to have been built about 1890. It's right on the Missouri River, and it divides Nebraska from Iowa. It changes in Iowa. Now it's nothing but cornfields. But they must get a lot more rain here because it's not nearly as dry. It's not the prairies and plains like we saw in Wyoming and Nebraska. Jesuit House of Theology. And here's Father Jim Bresnahan. He was my roommate at Harvard Law School and now a professor of theology at the theological school. Hi, Jim. Fire truck returning from the fire. I guess it wasn't too bad a one. But I really want to show you the Lutheran School of Theology. It's part of the complex where Father Jim is a professor. All the Catholic and the Protestant schools are sort of intertwined today. Close-up of the theological school. Jim is walking over towards the library. He explained to me that this is the largest theological school in the world. This is the chapel. How's that for modernity? This is the chapel in the Lutheran Theological Seminary. Blackboard. How's that for modern thinking? Use of all modern techniques. I'm entering the Jesuit School of Theology in Chicago. This is associated with the cluster of schools with the Lutheran Seminary. This is the in the basement of the theological place where Jim lives, where Jim said Mass for us this morning. I'll just show you how simple the church is. It's just a little room in the basement, and when Jim says Mass, he just wears his ordinary clothing and places a stole about him, and he lets me share in the saying of the Mass to the extent possible. To you from the Indiana Toll Road. You have to pay to ride on this road. As you can see, the leaves have already turned. I'm about 2 weeks late. Here on the northern route along Route 80, there are spots where very little of the foliage is remaining. Other places, however, there still are some colorful leaves. Beautiful rolling countryside of northwestern Pennsylvania. Here in the foreground is a Campground of America recreational vehicle stopping point. These are homes with, I suppose, area for horses. Typical Pennsylvania wooded hillside. There's more of this than anything in Pennsylvania, and they're very, very pretty. They've invited me to play golf with them this afternoon, getting into their new car, and we're going out on the beautiful field. You can see how beautiful the golf course is, all green and pretty. Beautiful along the fairways of the Reading Country Club, and here the trees are still in their autumnal foliage. Of the Reading Country Club. This is the clubhouse itself. There's the parking lot and the fairways. And Margie and Paul are waiting for me to finish taking the picture. Wave to us, Margie.
Lisa and Gemma. Louder, I guess. I'm glad that your daddy came to see me. And the weather is so nice here and the sun is shining. And I hope that he can come back soon again and bring you and Mom. Will you do that?
His apartment, just beyond the cornfield. And here's the Wyomissing Creek and the pretty green trees and the pastures. Except there aren't any cows around here anymore. And right across the street is the swimming pool. And the high school. Picture of Angela and Bert Winkler's home at 92 Beers Place in Stratford, Connecticut. It's a very pretty little street. Couple of very colorful trees right outside of Hartford, Connecticut. It's the end of October.
Show you Wenger. Ha.
Oh, thank you. This is the principal building that makes up the Harvard Law School. We see Memorial Hall, one of the older buildings at Harvard. You're entering the Harvard Yard. This goes back to about 1750 or so. Inside the Harvard Yard. A lot of great presidents were instructed in this area. Both of the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, and many more. States. 1633. More pictures of the Harvard Yard from outside. This is taken from Harvard Square. Some Cambridge fashions. The older law school dormitories. At that time when I was here, it only accommodated maybe 10% of the students. And next to it is the gymnasium used by the law students. I played squash here every afternoon. Roscoe Pound Hall. It didn't exist when I was here, but many of the reunion functions were held in this building. The new dormitory is to the rear of it. Classmates arrived in this car. He is Brendan Byrne, governor of the state of New Jersey. The Harvard rowing team in the, 7-man or 8-man shell. And a 2-man team right behind it. On the other side is the Harvard Business School where I lived. It too is along the lake, as you can see. I just noticed that's the girls' team. Church of St. Mary's in Providence. And that's Father Jim Duhame, my friend from the Army, crossing this street and coming over. Jim took me through the church, and he even took me all the way up on top of the tower. It was the most frightening experience I've had, and we stood all the way up there on the ceiling. He was showing me the bells. The rectory right next to the church. It was built 105 years ago and is falling apart. I stayed for breakfast, and I sat on the chair and it fell apart. It's really a poor place. Finally, look who's in the picture. I drove all the way from California and took all these reels of film, but I wasn't in any of them. But now I've got Jim Duhame, Father Jim Duhame, who knows how to work a camera, and he's taking the picture of me. I'm standing in North Scituate, which is in Rhode Island, at Jim's mother's home. I stayed at the parish house last night and then came over to see Mrs. Duhame, whom I knew 20 years ago when Jim and I were in the Army together. And it's a lovely place. Jim, why don't you just turn the camera and show some of the beautiful area around here. The Duhames have 7 acres in this beautiful spot. It's about 20 minutes outside the city of Providence. Wouldn't you like to live here? It's beautiful winter, summer, spring, and fall. Right now the leaves are turning and it's glorious. Wouldn't you like to have that in your own backyard in California? But you don't see that very often. The purpose in showing you this picture is to convince you that even in Rhode Island, which is the most populated state of all in the United States, there's still nobody living. It's just wide open spaces. Hartford, Connecticut. This is the state capitol in Hartford. Different kind of shot. This is the state building in Hartford. We are in New York. This is Park Avenue with the Pan Am building in the background. This is Madison Avenue at 56th Street. You notice how the high-rise buildings just continue as far as you can see. 5th Avenue with the usual construction going on impeding traffic. Curious as to what Bonwit Teller is featuring. That's all long and either dress or pantsuit. Things were expensive in Los Angeles. Here's the window of Tiffany's featuring a dozen eggs. World's biggest sliding board. This is the Avon building. Attire seems to be typical. Note the length of the dress. General Motors building at the corner of 5th Avenue and 58th Street. Just keeps going and going and going. Always a fire in New York. Typical New York intersection. Nobody's moving in any direction. Going too far. This is the first woman's bank in New York. I understand they've hired 2 men because of the law requirements. An altar in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. Or in Rockefeller Center. Street. This is Avenue of the Americas from 51st Street. This is Irvine Trust Building.